Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood is a European fairy tale about a young girl and a big bad wolf. Its origins can be traced back to several pre-17th century European folk tales. The two best-known versions were written by Charles Perrault and the Brothers Grimm. The story has been changed considerably in various retellings and subjected to numerous modern adaptations and readings. Other names for the story are Little Red Cap or simply Red Riding Hood. It is number 333 in the Aarne Thompson classification system for folktales. Tale. The story revolves around a girl called Little Red Riding Hood. In Perrault's versions of the tale, she is named after her red-hooded cape/cloak that she wears. The girl walks through the woods to deliver food to her sickly grandmother, wine and cake depending on the translation. In the Grimm's version, her mother had ordered her to stay strictly on the path. A big bad wolf wants to eat the girl and the food in the basket. He secretly stalks her behind trees, bushes, shrubs, and patches of little and tall grass. He approaches Little Red Riding Hood, who naively tells him where she is going. He suggests that the girl pick some flowers as a present for her grandmother, which she does. In the meantime, he goes to the grandmother's house and gains entry by pretending to be her. He swallows the grandmother whole. In some stories, he locks her in the closet and waits for the girl, disguised as the grandmother. When the girl arrives, she notices that her grandmother looks very strange. Little Red then says, "What a deep voice you have, the better to greet you with," responds the wolf. "Goodness, what big eyes you have, the better to see you with," responds the wolf. "And what big hands you have, the better to embrace you with," responds the wolf. "And lastly, what a big mouth you have, the better to eat you with," responds the wolf, at which point the wolf jumps out of the bed. Then he falls asleep. In Charles Perrault's version of the story, the first version to be published, the tale ends here. However, in later and more well-known versions, the story continues generally as follows. A woodcutter in the French version, but a hunter in the Brothers Grimm and traditional German versions, comes to the rescue with an axe and cuts open the sleeping wolf. Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother emerge shaken but unharmed. Then they fill the wolf's body with heavy stones. The wolf awakens and attempts to flee, but the stones cause him to collapse and die. In Grimm's version, the wolf leaves the house and tries to drink out of a well, but the stones in his stomach cause him to fall in and drown. Sanitized versions of the story have the grandmother locked in the closet instead of being eaten, and some have Little Red Riding Hood saved by the lumberjack as the wolf advances on her rather than after she is eaten, where the woodcutter kills the wolf with his axe. The tale makes the clearest contrast between the safe world of the village and the dangers of the forest, conventional antitheses that are essentially medieval, though no written versions are as old as that. It also warns about the dangers of not obeying one's mother, at least in Grimm's version. History. Relationship to other tales. The story displays many similarities to stories from classical Greece and Rome. Scholar Graham Anderson has compared the story to a local legend recounted by Pausanias, in which each year a virgin girl was offered to a malevolent spirit dressed in the skin of a wolf who raped the girl. Then, one year, the boxer Euthymos came along, slew the spirit, and married the girl who had been offered as a sacrifice. There are also a number of different stories recounted by Greek authors involving a woman named Pyrrha, literally fire, and a man with some name meaning wolf. The Roman poet Horace alludes to a tale in which a male child is rescued alive from the belly of Lamia, an ogress in classical mythology. The dialogue between the big bad wolf and Little Red Riding Hood has its analogies to the Norse Thrymsvidr from the Elder Edda. The giant Thrymr had stolen Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, and demanded Freyja as his bride for its return. Instead, the gods dressed Thor as a bride and sent him. When the giants note Thor's unladylike eyes eating and drinking, Loki explains them as Freyja's not having slept, eaten, or drunk, out of longing for the wedding. A parallel to another Norse myth. A similar story also belongs to the North African tradition, namely in Kabylia, where a number of versions are attested. The theme of the little girl who visits her granddad in his cabin and is recognized by the sound of her bracelets constitutes the refrain of a well-known song by the modern singer Idir, Avava Inuva. The theme of the ravening wolf and of the creature released unharmed from its belly is also reflected in the Russian tale Peter and the Wolf and another Grimm tale The Wolf and the Seven Young Kids, but its general theme of restoration is at least as old as the biblical story Jonah and the Whale. The theme also appears in the story of the life of Saint Margaret, wherein the saint emerges unharmed from the belly of a dragon, and in the epic The Red Path by Jim C. Hines. A Taiwanese story from the 16th century known as Grandaunt Tiger bears several striking similarities. When the girl's mother goes out, the tigress comes to the girl's house and pretends to be their aunt, asking to come in. The girl says that her voice does not sound right, so the tigress attempts to disguise her voice. Then the girl says that her hands feel too coarse, so the tigress attempts to make them smoother. When finally the tigress gains entry, she eats the girl's sister's hand. The girl comes up with a ruse to go outside and fetch some food for her aunt. Grandaunt Tiger, suspicious of the girl, ties a rope to her leg. The girl ties a bucket to the rope to fool her, but Grandaunt Tiger realizes this and chases after her, whereupon she climbs into a tree. The girl tells the tigress that she will let her eat her, but first she would like to feed her some fruit from the tree. The tigress comes closer to eat the food, whereupon the girl pours boiling hot oil down her throat, killing her. According to Paul Delaroux, a similar narrative is found in East Asian stories, namely in China, Korea, and Japan, with the title The Tiger and the Children. Earliest versions. The origins of the Little Red Riding Hood story can be traced to several likely pre-17th century versions from various European countries. Some of these are significantly different from the currently known Grimm's inspired version. It was told by French peasants in the 10th century and recorded by the cathedral schoolmaster Egbert of Liege. In Italy, Little Red Riding Hood was told by peasants in the 14th century, where a number of versions exist, including La Fintanana, the False Grandmother, written, among others, by Italo Calvino in the Italian Folktales collection. It has also been called the Story of Grandmother. It is also possible that this early tale has roots in very similar East Asian tales, e.g. Grandaunt Tiger. These early variations of the tale do differ from the currently known version in several ways. The antagonist is not always a wolf, but sometimes a Bisu werewolf, making these tales relevant to the werewolf trials similar to witch trials of the time, e.g. the trial of Peter Stump. The wolf usually leaves the grandmother's blood and flesh for the girl to eat, who then unwittingly cannibalizes her own grandmother. Furthermore, the wolf was also known to ask her to remove her clothing and toss it into the fire. In some versions, the wolf eats the girl after she gets into bed with him, and the story ends there. In others, she sees through his disguise and tries to escape, complaining to her grandmother that she needs to defecate and would not wish to do so in the bed. The wolf reluctantly lets her go, tied to a piece of string so she does not get away. However, the girl slips the string over something else and runs off. In these stories, she escapes with no help from any male or older female figure, instead using her own cunning or, in some versions, the help of a younger boy who she happens to run into. Sometimes, though more rarely, the Red Hood is even non-existent. In other tellings of the story, the wolf chases after Little Red Riding Hood. She escapes with the help of some laundresses, who spread a sheet taut over a river so she may escape. When the wolf follows Red over the bridge of cloth, the sheet is released and the wolf drowns in the river. And in another version, the wolf is pushed into the fire while he is preparing the flesh of the grandmother to be eaten by the girl. Charles Perrault. The Brothers Grimm. In the 19th century, two separate German versions were retold to Jacob Grimm and his younger brother Wilhelm Grimm, known as the Brothers Grimm. The first by Jeanette Hassenpflug 1791-1860, and the second by Marie Hassenplug 1788–1856. The brothers turned the first version to the main body of the story and the second into a sequel of it. The story as Rotkäppchen was included in the first edition of their collection Kinder und Hausmärchen Children's and Household Tales 1812 KHM 26. The earlier parts of the tale agree so closely with Perrault's variant that it is almost certainly the source of the tale. However, they modified the ending. This version had the little girl and her grandmother saved by a huntsman who was after the wolf's skin. This ending is identical to that in the tale The Wolf and the Seven Young Kids, which appears to be the source. The second part featured the girl and her grandmother trapping and killing another wolf. The girl did not leave the path when the wolf spoke to her. Her grandmother locked the door to keep it out, and when the wolf lurked, the grandmother had Little Red Riding Hood put a trough under the chimney and fill it with water that sausages had been cooked in. The smell lured the wolf down, and it drowned. The brothers further revised the story in later editions, and it reached the above-mentioned final and better-known version in the 1857 edition of their work. It is notably tamer than the older stories, which contained darker themes. Later versions. Numerous authors have rewritten or adapted this tale. Charles Perrault, in his version of the fairy tale called The True History of Little Golden Hood 1888, gives the girl a real name, Blanchette. Andrew Lang included a variant called The True History of Little Golden Hood in the Red Fairy Book 1890. He derived it from the works of Charles Perrault, in Countess of Charles Perrault. This version explicitly states that the story had been mistold earlier. The girl is saved, but not by the huntsman. When the wolf tries to eat her, its mouth is burned by the golden hood she wears, which is enchanted. James N. Barker wrote a variation of Little Red Riding Hood in 1827 as an approximately 1,000-word story. It was later reprinted in 1858 in a book of collected stories edited by William E. Burton, called the Cyclopedia of Wit and Humor. The reprint also features a wood engraving of a clothed wolf on a bended knee holding Little Red Riding Hood's hand. In the 20th century, the popularity of the tale appeared to snowball, with many new versions being written and produced, especially in the wake of Freudian analysis, deconstruction, and feminist critical theory. See adaptations below. This trend has also led to a number of academic texts being written that focus on Little Red Riding Hood, including works by Alan Duns and Jack Sipes. Interpretations. Apart from the overt warning about talking to strangers, there are many interpretations of the classic fairy tale, many of them sexual. Some are listed below. Natural cycles. Folklorists and cultural anthropologists, such as P. St. Ives and Edward Burnett Tyler, saw Little Red Riding Hood in terms of solar myths and other naturally occurring cycles. Her red hood could represent the bright sun, which is ultimately swallowed by the terrible night the wolf, and the variations in which she is cut out of the wolf's belly represent the dawn. In this interpretation, there is a connection between the wolf of this tale and Skoll, the wolf in Norse mythology that will swallow the personified sun at Ragnarok, or Fenrir. Alternatively, the tale could be about the season of spring or the month of May escaping the winter. Rite. The tale has been interpreted as a puberty rite stemming from a prehistoric origin, sometimes an origin stemming from a previous matriarchal era. The girl, leaving home, enters a liminal state and by going through the acts of the tale is transformed into an adult woman by the act of coming out of the wolf's stomach. Rebirth. Bruno Bettelheim, in The Uses of Enchantment, The Meaning and Importance of Fairy Tales 1976, recast the Little Red Riding Hood motif in terms of classic Freudian analysis that shows how fairy tales educate, support, and liberate children's emotions. The motif of the huntsman cutting open the wolf he interpreted as a rebirth. Norse myth, or Smith. The poem Thrimskvida from the Poetic Edda mirrors some elements of Red Riding Hood. Loki's explanations for the strange behavior of Freyja, actually Thor disguised as Freyja, mirror the wolf's explanations for his strange appearance. The Red Hood has often been given great importance in many interpretations, with a significance from the dawn to blood. Erotic, romantic, or rape connotations. A sexual analysis of the tale may also include negative connotations in terms of rape or abduction. In Against Our Will, Susan Brownmiller describes the fairy tale as a description of rape. However, many revisionist retellings choose to focus on empowerment and depict Little Red Riding Hood or the grandmother successfully defending herself against the wolf. Such tellings bear some similarity to the animal bridegroom tales, such as Beauty and the Beast or the Frog Prince, but where the heroines of those tales revert the hero to a prince. These tellings of Little Red Riding Hood reveal to the heroine that she has a wild nature like the heroes. These interpretations refuse to characterize Little Red Riding Hood as a victim. These are tales of female empowerment. The gender role varies according to the professional level and gender of the artist that illustrates these characters. Female artists tend to reflect a stereotypic aggressive male role on the wolf, while male artists were more likely to eroticize the characters. In general, professional artists do not imply sexual intent between the characters and produce family-friendly illustrations. In popular culture, animation and film, in Tex Avery's short animated cartoon, Red Hot Riding Hood 1943, the story is recast in an adult-oriented urban setting, with the suave, sharp-dressed wolf howling after the nightclub singer Red. Avery used the same cast and themes in a subsequent series of cartoons. Similar modern takes also feature in Swing Shift Cinderella 1945 and Little Rural Riding Hood 1949. Neil Jordan directed a film version of The Company of Wolves 1984 based on the short story by Angela Carter. The wolf in this version of the tale is in fact a werewolf, which comes to the newly menstruating Red Riding Hood in the forest in the form of a charming hunter. The hunter turns into a wolf and eats her grandmother, and is about to devour Red Riding Hood as well, but she is equally seductive and ends up lying with the wolf man. This version may be interpreted as a young girl's journey into womanhood, both with regard to menstruation and sexual awakening. Little Red Riding Hood and the Wolf is a 1937 adaptation of the story by the German state, which had a deep interest in the stories of the Brothers Grimm and saw them as useful for teaching ideology. This version has been suppressed, but has been seen by academics. Krasnaya Shapachka 1937 is a Soviet black and white animated film by the Brumberg sisters, the so-called grandmothers of the Russian animation. Its plot differs slightly from the original fairy tale. It was issued on videotapes in various collections in the 1980s via the Second System and in the 1990s via the PAL system in collections of animated films of a video studio, Soyuz since 1994 and 1995 respectively. The Big Bad Wolf is an animated short released on 13 April 1934 by United Artists, produced by Walt Disney and directed by Burt Gillett as part of the Silly Symphony series. In the film The Big Bad Wolf from 1933's, in the Soviet-Russian animated film Petya and Little Red Riding Hood 1958, directed by Boris Stepantsev and Evgeny Raykovsky, the main character, a boy named Petya Ivanov, witnesses the gray wolf deceiving a trusting girl and risks his life to rescue her and her grandmother. The animated movie is considered a cult film, with many of its lines having become catchphrases in popular culture. In 1959 and 1960, the film received awards at festivals in Kyiv, Ukraine, and Annecy, Estonia. The 1996 movie Freeway is a crime drama loosely adapted from the Riding Hood story, with Riding Hood Reese Witherspoon recast as an abused, illiterate teenager, and the wolf Kiefer Sutherland portrayed as a serial killer named Bob Wolverton. The film had one straight-to-video sequel. Hoodwinked 2005 is a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood as a police investigation. The film Red Riding Hood 2006 is a musical based upon the tale. The film Red Riding Hood 2011 is loosely based upon the tale. The wolf appears in the Shrek franchise of films. He is wearing the grandmother's clothing as in the fairy tale, though the films imply that the gown is merely a personal style choice and that the wolf is not dangerous. Red Riding Hood briefly appears in the film Shrek 2, 2004, wherein she is frightened by Shrek and Fiona and runs off. Red Riding Hood is one of the main characters in the 2014 film adaptation of the 1987 musical Into the Woods and is portrayed by Lilla Crawford. Little Red Riding Hood is parodied in the Warner Bros. Cartoons Little Red Riding Rabbit 1944, Merry Melodies and the Windblown Hair 1949. Little Red Riding Hood is parodied in the Super Mario Bros. Super Show episode Little Red Riding Princess with Princess Toadstool in the role of Red Riding Hood and King Koopa in the role of the Big Bad Wolf. Children at Play 2010 is a short film written and directed by Lexan Rosser, starring Brian DeChart. The film can be interpreted as a reimagining of the classic fairy tale due to its number of overt/subtle parallels and references. The character Ruby Rose in the popular internet series RWBY is based on Little Red Riding Hood. Television. In the pilot episode Wolf Moon of the MTV hit series Teen Wolf, the protagonist Scott McCall wears a red hoodie when he gets attacked by an alpha werewolf in the woods in the night of a full moon. The pilot episode of NBC TV series Grimm reveals that the Red Riding Hood stories were inspired by the fabled attacks of Bloodbaden, lycanthropic beings who have a deeply ingrained bloodlust and a weakness for victims wearing red. Red Riding Hood is a character in ABC Once Upon a Time 2011 TV series. In this version of the tale, Red, portrayed by Megan Ory, is a werewolf, and her cape is the only thing that can prevent her from metamorphosing during a full moon. Her Storybrooke persona is Ruby. The story was retold as part of the episode Grimm Job of the American animated TV series Family Guy Season 12, Episode 10, with Stewie playing Little Red Riding Hood and Brian the Big Bad Wolf. Additionally, both Red Riding Hood and the Big Bad Wolf appeared briefly in a clip in the Season 1 episode The Sun Also Draws. In the TV series Goldie and Bear, Red is a little girl who delivers muffins to her granny and likes to keep her hood clean and tidy. In the Disney Junior series Little Einstein's episode Little Red Rocket Hood, the format follows the story, but in the episode Rocket is taking a stew pot with his favorite rocket soup for his grandma, who has a bad cold, with help from the Little Einsteins, however, his archenemy Big J. Upon arriving at Grandma Rocket's home, Big Jet tricks them, again only to then crash into a mud puddle before Rocket cures his grandma with the soup. Literature. Music. A.P. Randolph's 1925 How Could Red Riding Hood Have Been So Very Good was the first song known to be banned from radio because of its sexual suggestiveness. Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs' hit song, Lil Red Riding Hood 1966, take Wolf's point of view, implying that he wants love rather than blood. Here, the wolf befriends Little Red Riding Hood disguised as a sheep and offers to protect her on her journey through the woods. The Kelly Family's The Wolf 1994. During the instrumental bridge in live shows, the song's lead singer, Joey, does both Little Red Riding Hood's and Wolf's part, where the child asks her grandmother about the big eyes, ears, and mouth. Little Red Riding Hood is a raw-style song by Da Tweekaz, which was later remixed by Ecstatic. Sonny's concept photo for Girls' Generation's third studio album The Boys was inspired by Little Red Riding Hood. Lana Del Rey has an unreleased song called Big Bad Wolf leaked in 2012 that was inspired by Little Red Riding Hood. The music videos of the songs Call Me When You're Sober from American rock band Evanescence and The Hunted from Canadian supergroup Saint Asonia featuring Sully Erna from American heavy metal band Godsmack were inspired by Lee. Rachmaninoff's Op. 39 No. 6 Etudes Tableau is nicknamed Little Red Riding Hood for its dark theme and the wolf-like connotations of the piece. The Real Tuesday Welds Me and Mr. Wolf 2011 portrays the relationship between the wolf and Red Riding Hood as a toxic relationship. Games, musicals. Little Red Riding Hood is one of the central characters in the Broadway musical Into the Woods 1987 by Stephen Sondheim and James Lapine. In the song, I Know Things Now, she speaks of how the wolf made her feel excited, well, excited and scared, in a reference to the sexual undertones of their relationship. Red Riding Hood's cape is also one of the musical's 4 quest items that are emblematic of fairy tales.